Good afternoon, dear viewer. My name is Peter Muya. I'm co-founder and managing partner of PTI Consulting. We are a management consultancy firm that is interested in providing business advisory services around enterprise transformation. And this has to do with how organizations change to be able to take advantage of emerging technologies to better provide goods and services to their customers. We've been in operation for the last 5 years, providing wide-ranging advisory services to both private and public sector. And I'm here today to talk about the subject of enterprise architecture. It's a big term, but I'll try as much to unpack it in a language that is easily palatable to all of us. So in my discussion today, I'll talk about what enterprise architecture is. I'll talk about how we do enterprise architecture. I'll also talk about why we do enterprise architecture. So it's a three-phased conversation. So what is enterprise architecture? It's an interesting subject. If you do a Google search on the term, you'll find quite a number of definitions, and some on point, some a bit off. And the thing is, enterprise architecture is a mentor, it's a psychological kind of thing. It's about thinking. So our interpretation of what enterprise architecture is may influence or determine how we approach the matter. The concept was founded by a gentleman called John Zachman in 1983, who then was working for IBM, and he was looking for what he called the periodic table of how an organization can be defined. His motivation was to find the very core of an organization in terms of the elements that make it, so that an organization is better understood. And for lack of a better term, he used the word enterprise architecture. Then he was defining it of something like information architecture. And so the term has evolved. That is close to 24 years to date, 34 years to date. So between that intervening period, different schools of thoughts and enterprises and organizations have evolved the term to suit their definitions. So giving it a definition that is as easily layperson as possible, I will avoid the issues of what Zachman was talking about, periodic table, because again, even that looks technical in this conversation. So if you think about it, we all talk about change. We are talking about an organization that is surrounded by a constant sea of change. There is legislation that is changing, there is competition that is coming in, customers change their preferences, and that influences organizations in terms of how they need to respond to these stimuli, external and internal, that determine how they do business within a particular context. And that in a way demands a certain level of thinking that is holistic and coherent, that ensures that the responses that an organization makes with regards to these internal and external stimuli are aligned with the long-term objectives of the organization. And if that is the case, you need some kind of thinking that brings in maturity in terms of what products you want to roll out, what processes you want to use to achieve that, what kind of decision-making structures and people, we call it culture, and what tools, either technology or otherwise, that you need to use to be able to achieve that. Now, these different pieces of things have significant importance on the enterprise, but they have to be looked at in a holistic manner. And that is how the discipline of enterprise architecture comes in. So, for example, for you to change something, you've got to understand its complexity. Take, for example, Take for example a mechanic who is repairing a car. This guy has to understand the transmission system for them to be able to diagnose and find a problem and then propose a solution. So they've got to understand the composition of the different components that make up this particular part that needs to be changed or transformed, if you may. So he has to apply a certain level of thinking to be able to understand, okay, what is the interrelationship between the different parts? If I touch here, what do I break? If I touch here, what do I alter? If I touch here, what do I change? So the ability to understand the complexity of that particular, little structure or big, and the thinking involved, then would determine whether or not the change that he applies or the solution that he provides is the right one for whatever he's trying to do. And so normally what happens is for us to be able to understand complexity, we want to break down complexity or to be able to understand the interrelationship between things. The human mind is very much drawn to patterns. So you look at the pattern of how things are formed, and somehow that leads you to appreciate the composition of the different components. If you take an example of, let's say, a judge, somebody who is investigating a case or is supposed to make a decision concerning a convict, normally they don't jump into conclusions based on the accusations. They examine every fact. They depend on witness account. They depend on a couple of inputs, and therefore build a pattern that then gives them the ability to decide whether the accused person is guilty or not. So in the process, what they are doing is trying to understand the complexity of the case and to break it down in a way that makes them make a better decision that is fair to the parties involved. And essentially that is the heart of enterprise architecture. So enterprise architecture, contrary to opinion, seemingly looks like very technology oriented or technical in nature, but in actual fact it's more than just IT. It's more than just about computer systems. It encompasses the enterprise, as the name suggests. And the truth is, CEOs and leaders of organizations, by and large, whether they know it or not, they are by default the first enterprise architects within an organization. They architect the future of the organization. They determine the direction the organization takes. And then they cascade that direction to the respective managers, who then, within their own respective departments or division, they run with whatever that will help to achieve that vision. And so our objective, or our what we try to do using enterprise architecture, is to structure the thought process from top to bottom, that then ensures how you strategize or how you create vision for the organization, considers the complexity, the structural complexity of the organization, how you translate that into respective initiatives to be able to address that. It also has several considerations that it takes into place, and that is guided by the vision. And then how then that gets implemented and becomes operational also follows through certain set of rules or guidelines that have been set. And it keeps everybody in check, so everybody knows what they need to play within the part that makes the whole, but also as participants of the whole. You may think about it, for example, like a situation of an aircraft. So you have an aircraft that is flying at 33,000 feet above sea level. This aircraft at some point will land. While at 33,000 feet, the aircraft, possibly, those who are there, the pilot or anyone else, what they see on the ground is minute. It's almost microscopic. but they know that there is something on the ground. They know they are building, they know either there is a sea below, but they don't know how many fish are in that sea. But they have an idea. So they have a very broad understanding of what they are trying or where they are going on the ground. But as a plane comes down and maybe falls down to reduces altitude to something like 10,000 feet, something changes. Then things start to appear a bit closer. You can tell rooftops of buildings, but you can't quite tell the people. Possibly you can't tell who they are. For example, there are emerging trends and concepts that are being talked about. One of them being, let's say, Internet of Things, or the like. They are emerging technology trends. Now, those concepts are exciting conversations in a boardroom. We want to digitize, we want to transform, we want to do this. But at that level, we are looking at them as concepts. It's 33,000 feet above sea level view. But somebody has to answer the question, how does this concept translate to value in my organization? In other words, how do I move from 33,000 feet to ground zero? And so, but that has to be translated. So as you move 33,000 feet coming to 10,000 feet, then we are looking at them as logical. We're having a logical view. So we can relate and say, this concept, I can relate it in this particular function of my organization. For example, if we are automating how we do our lending using the latest technologies, we are now picking concepts and trying to contextualize them in a logical flow that meets the objectives of our organization uniquely from another organization. So we are having a logical view of the same issue that we had at 33,000 feet. If you take the example, for example, of what the bankers are doing right now with the PesaLink, that is the interbank payment platform. In 2012, that was a concept. Yeah, people thought, how can we integrate banks? How can they interoperate? It was a concept within the confines of a few people. And then specialists came and actually did feasibility studies. They even presented options and all that. Now those options became a logical representation of how typically it would work. But it wasn't working. Some people actually had to install the system, it had to be configured, it had to be tested, it had to go through pilot, it had to be approved by CBK for pilot. And right now we are seeing about 3.5 million subscribers who have signed in. So now we have a physical view of what we had as 33,000 feet 5 years or 6 years back. Now, if you look at that entire progression, that is aspects of enterprise architecture. So there was conceptual view, it was translated to logical, it became, and finally it became physical, and now it's actually in use. So that, in a way, in loose terms, is what we call enterprise architecture. I do not want to dwell on scientific definitions because they may just remain definitions. And so if you want to take away what a definition is, just pick on all those concepts I've talked about and using those particular case examples. And as you can see from what I have explained, enterprise architecture is more than just technology. It's about the enterprise, including technology.